Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. Hope the wind is at your back. Imagine if your nervous system were a cathedral, not a machine, not a malfunctioning circuit, but a living temple sculpted by experience, memory, mystery, and motion. Today's guest, Dr. Henrietta Szutorisz, doesn't just study the brain. She listens to its prayers, decodes its confessions, and challenges its illusions. She's a neuroscientist by training, a revolutionary by nature, the founder of Objective Recovery, where data meets soul and the tired scripts of addiction and mental health get rewritten in real time. But she's not here to give you answers. She's here to help us ask better questions. What if the root of addiction isn't a disease, but a forgotten ritual? What if trauma isn't something to erase, but to reweave? What if the brain isn't a hard drive, but a symphony, and psychedelics are simply tuning forks for forgotten frequencies? Henrietta sits at the crossroads between serotonin and soul, dopamine and destiny, neuroplasticity and the myth of the fixed self. She dares to say that maybe, just maybe, the mechanisms of action is a mirage, and we are the experiment we've been waiting for. So today we're not talking about fixing people, we're talking about remembering. We're talking about sacred biology. We're talking about the fire of consciousness waking up in the folds of the cortex. This is Alan Watts in a lab coat, Whitehead whispering through neurotransmitters, Burning Man in a petri dish. And this conversation, this unfolding, this inquiry is for those who still believe the map is not the territory and that healing is not a protocol, but a pilgrimage. Welcome to the place where science stops performing and starts dancing. Let us begin with Henrietta today. How are you?
Hi, George, and everyone. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think we did one of these about 2 years ago, so it's nice to do it again.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. I love talking to you, and we've had some really beautiful conversations, and I love your perspective. And for someone who's like a layman over here, I don't thoroughly understand the ideas of neuroscience. I've never studied it like you, so I always am excited to speak with you, and I'm excited that you're here today. Should we jump into some ideas and just begin this conversation?
Yeah, but before that, I just want to
Yeah.
comment on your introduction because I was really impressed by it. It's very poetic. It would never occur to me to introduce myself in that way. I kind of like it, but it's really weird to see, me being introduced in that way, in that context. So thank you for that. It's very different. Definitely not something that I'm used to.
Oh, I had our settings kind of jump out at us for a minute. Let me go ahead and change one thing right here. Okay, that'll be better. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I always want people that I introduce to I want them to see themselves the way I see them. And I see it in a poetic sort of nature, and it's definitely different than the way I see the world. So thank you for being here. And, I think I'm always curious about the neuroscientist perspective. And the first question that kind of comes to mind for me is, what do you think that we misunderstand most about how psychedelics work? Not biologically, but experientially.
I think it's so there are many things, and both like positives and negatives
Yes.
that can be misunderstood. I think one of the most general notions to me is that some people say that psychedelics can show us truth or reality, like it gives us access to ultimate
Yes.
reality and things like that, and. So you are asking my opinion, right? So
Yes.
yeah, so that's exactly the point. So I don't think that there is we know from any sources that we have access to any sort of ultimate truth, or psychedelics do that. In fact, from neuroscience research, it's what is clear is that they don't show us external truth, but we don't know. They basically disrupt or interfere with our perception of reality. So these are two different things. There are other notions as well in a therapeutic context. So I work on addiction, for example, and psychedelics are usually a substance, a drug, chemical. And some people say that even professionals these days that who are not really supportive of psychedelics, that it's not a good idea to use drugs. We don't need drugs. We can basically access the same experiences and the same thoughts and emotions and everything in natural ways as well, and especially in the context of addiction. So it's treating addiction with another substance is not a good idea, and I think this is a bit narrow-minded these days. We can get into it in more detail if you want later. And then finally is sometimes people who are really enthusiastic and big fan of psychedelic use go a bit overboard and tend to think that psychedelics can be a holy grail to healing and to changing, transformation, almost like a fast track. And even some retreats these days advertise themselves in a way that, with this kind of ideas that you just go there to spend a few days there and come back completely changed person. And I think that's definitely not true, because it's all just a mental experience. And then if we want transformation as a consequence, we still need to do the hard work in our everyday life with ordinary consciousness. So we can't stay on psychedelics forever. These are some that I encounter usually.
It's a beautiful answer. Thank you for that. I often wonder, I see so much happening right now in the world of addiction and psychedelics, and I'm curious from your perspective. It seems to me, and this is just my opinion, but the people that are best able to help people with addiction are people that themselves have gone through addiction. And it almost seems sort of antiquated, or it almost seems odd to me that we could train people to help people in addiction that have never been addicted. Is that sort of like a problem on some level? Like, shouldn't the people that have been addicted be the best people suited to help other people with addiction?
That's a very, very good question. And it's definitely true that many people, including myself, gravitate to this profession, this field, because we experience addiction firsthand. So I'm one of those. It's just normal. But I don't personally think that we need to experience everything firsthand in order to be able to help others. There are many, just one example is health. Anything about health. If we have some health issue and go to see a doctor, that doctor will not have experienced all the different diseases and problems. Same for mental health. Even if someone, even in addiction, professional, treatment professional, counselor, or anyone who deals with that. I'm pretty sure that nobody experienced every kind of addiction. So, we are familiar with some, not with others. So I think it helps. It can help, but it's not a necessity, in my opinion.
Yeah. When I was talking to my wife about it, and she goes, "George, that's ridiculous. My oncologist doesn't need to have cancer in order to help me with cancer." I was like, she's so brilliant. But I think addiction's kind of a different animal on some level. Like, it's very difficult. You could read all the books you want about addiction, but unless you've thoroughly understood what it's like to be thinking about a substance when you should be thinking about your family, you'll never really be able to connect with that person that's going through that thing on some level. And I realize it's sort of, perhaps it's not logical, or perhaps it's not something that people can do. But I don't know. I really feel, and you as an example of this, maybe you can explain how your relationship with substances has allowed you to become better helping people with substance abuse problems.
Yeah, so addiction is it's one of those that I definitely feel that it helps to have first-hand experience, perhaps a bit more than something like cancer. That is because the internal drive of an addiction can be very difficult to even to explain to someone else who has never experienced or who has never seen addiction, even though it's very rare that someone goes through life, they never see addiction in their, at least in their environment, because it's so common. But the internal drives, it's just, for example, the very definition of addiction is that it's behaviors that have negative consequences, and we continue engaging in the behavior in spite of the negative consequences. So it can be very hard to explain to someone and even understand someone who has never been there, that why we make those choices, because addiction does not discriminate. Many people, very high intelligence, very otherwise very successful lives, experience it. And so it can be, that's why people come up with ideas that it's the old concepts or ideas that it's a moral failure, when addiction is like it's just judgment before we started studying actually how it works, the neuroscience, the biology, and so on. So it's definitely very hard. One very specific example that I always state, because that was probably the most intense from my personal experience, is that cravings or a desire or urges to engage in an addictive behavior, whether it's a drug or anything else. And it's so weird, even for me. I had that, when I was in that state, I had that on a daily basis, and it's so weird how it can. The whole, almost like a reality shift when it happens, that we see that this is not good for us, and then we make a decision that we want to stop, we want to get better, we want to resolve. This is a problem that we need to resolve, because it gets in the way of our goals, our life, enjoyment, everything. And still in the next moment something happens, or without apparent reason, we just go out and seek the drug, or whatever is our addiction, or a behavior of choice. And it can be very hard to understand for someone who has never been there. But I still think that it can be, now there is we know more about it in general from science, and this is also from psychology and treatment, and decades of experience, and even professionals who have never been there, at least in a severe form, they can utilize their just intellectual understanding and knowledge, at least to a certain extent. But I definitely find that in my own professional life, I definitely connect easily, but much more easily, and people actually find it very comforting and very, very, very nice that it's someone they seek help, and the helper is someone who actually understands, even without words. So
there's something to be said about the language of experience. And when you're talking to someone who's been through something similar as you, and it is like, on some level, in my opinion, it takes away the shame and the guilt, because you're talking to someone that has been through it. And sometimes if we're in a clinical setting, it's like, oh, this person is an authority figure. They got a lab coat on, they got a clipboard, and when you come in, you're coming in as a patient, like, oh man, there must be something wrong with me. And it changes the dynamic of it. So it's so refreshing to get to see people that have had not only the experience and understand the language of addiction, but are willing to help people move through it on some level. I guess, there's something interesting, like when it comes to humankind, like we are an addictive species. Like it's not just drugs, it's social media. Like everyone's addicted to money. Like we're all addicted to it. Like we have to have it. Like we can't survive without it. So when you pull back the curtain, it seems like we are just swimming in addiction, whether it's, social media, money, porn for some people, drugs for some people. What do you think about the human being as an addictive species?
I definitely agree with that. That's describing, human species as addictive. Maybe that's taking it a little too far, but addiction exists because we are definitely biologically wired for it. And examples that, so basically it's the mechanisms, even in the brain and the behavior, all those things, they don't exist. We don't have them in the first place to serve addiction. We have them because they have other functions, and that other function is basic survival. And for example, just even very simply eating. the experience of eating and food, that we find food pleasurable and eating pleasurable. Other relationships, that relationships, a good relationship, it's usually enjoyable, and if we like the attachment, the connection, and so on. Sex, it's very obvious, it serves reproduction, evolution, so all these. And so the pleasure component, it's just something that in biology usually we see it as something that evolution created for the species in order for us to survive. And what happens is that there are so many other options in reality in our lives that we can interact with, and including drugs, including experiences that are not even everyday ordinary experiences. And some of those can be very, very stimulating, or we can feel that they solve a problem or anything, and it's very easy to experience that as it's positive, pleasurable, at least in the beginning, and that's how slowly we usually fall in this addiction develop. That's how an addiction develops, and eventually most of the time it's no longer just seeking pleasure. It's usually also just kind of numbing and escaping the reality of the consequences of that behavior that the addiction caused in the first place. So that's how it becomes a vicious cycle. So so it's definitely there. All the mechanisms and everything are there because in the first place they serve survival.
It's a brilliant breakdown. I appreciate that. What's going on? I'm hopeful that you can describe. Some people may not understand what mechanism of action is, and I was hoping maybe you could define that and then tell people in your experience what's going on with mechanism of action in addiction.
But it's very complex, and so it's there is your first question was about misunderstanding, and maybe I can open with that, because
please.
There are so these days people understand more about addiction even without any really deep scientific knowledge, and we speak about dopamine and pleasure seeking. We just discussed that. I know it, but it's if we according to based on what we know currently about how it works, it's a simplification. So there are it's basically we talked about that system. So there we have this system that serves survival, and so these different external drugs or anything experiences can basically interfere with those mechanisms, and those mechanisms are there are many different, they operate on many different levels. So there are the emotions. Addiction usually have some kind of emotional drive. Many people even like to split, like when we talk about the brain and different brain areas, that there are the emotional brain, or the brain areas that regulate emotions, versus the cognitive and control. And so what happens is that one of the primary features of addiction is that this emotional drive and the cognitive control, that decision making, what is beneficial for me, risk benefit, it gets disconnected, these two. So what we feel in the moment can take over, and so this operates on many different levels neurobiologically. I studied this for more than 15 years now. So on the level of molecules, so I'm not talking just about dopamine or neurotransmitters, but just many, even how genes work, and many things about physiology and neurodevelopment, why people develop addictions. Some people, others don't. So there are developmental components. So it's very, very complex, and what causes it from basically from nature is it can be different things, such as there is some level of genetic predispositions, and there is also the effect of the environment that can affect how genes function and change all these developmental processes, and our cognitive functions, how we deal with emotions and all this. So it's very hard to actually summarize it. It's actually a good experience for me trying to share a very concise version of how addiction works and the mechanisms.
I love it. I think you did a fantastic job at it.
Mhm.
I've been talking to quite a few people in the world of psychedelics, and again, I don't thoroughly understand mechanism of action or exactly what's happening in the brain, but it seems to me from a lot of the feedback I'm getting that at least in some psychedelics, they're resetting the receptors back to a more normal state. Like I know I was talking to someone with iboga, and they were talking about how it goes in and it changes the receptors for upregulation and downregulation. Is that different than a lot of the drugs we have now, or is that even accurate?
So it's so I would say that what is known about it now that is still relatively new. This research is that so it goes back to what we discussed in the beginning about reality and our perception of reality and how that works. So one thing that psychedelics do is they interfere with basically control and how the brain, how we construct reality based on
I love
what
that.
goes on inside and the external like sensory input and everything that how we interact with the environment. And it's just very briefly it disrupts some of the processes, some of the known the classic psychedelics at least, some of these mechanisms. I'm sure you heard about the default mode network and other things that control, and basically that once that is removed, and it removes also this older experience based. Perceptions and reality models, and
Yeah.
what we think about truth, and how we see others, how we see ourselves, identity, and all that. And so, because the way they interfere with the mechanisms through that, they basically remove this. Relatively rigid control, and then we can have access to a more like flexible state. So that's what's one of the main areas of focus also in research, and so how that works. So why that becomes more flexible, and all that hallucinations, and how that works.
Yeah.
That's also because the filters, reality, normal reality perception filters and models, the way we see reality and ourselves are removed. I'm sure you speak a lot about what we usually describe it ego dissolution or ego death. That's just a form of it. It's
Yeah.
just that our own construct of ourself is also a bit loosened, and then it creates space for new versions, new associations, new connections, and so on. Literally, when people study this, what they can see in a brain image, brain imaging studies, is that there are many new connections formed in the brain, and the old ones are changed. So, and there are many levels and there are others that are people are beginning to understand now, but there is also a lot of unknown about it. So we definitely don't understand everything about how psychedelics work.
It's a great answer. I love the interjection of truth and identity in there. It's such an interesting time because you have so many people working in psychedelics that may not have a background in mechanism of action, but they do understand the idea of, oh, I'm changing my identity or my truth has changed. And in some level, that's speaking to the mechanism of action. It's I think it's a beautiful time for science and sort of the underground that are kind of at loggerheads at times, but they're working together to try to figure out a better definition of like what's happening on some level. Do you see, as a neuroscientist, is it ever like frustrating to hear people talk about like their ego death, or like they saw this hallucination, or from a neuroscientific point of view, does that helpful or is it hurtful, or what do you think about that sort of
You mean
relationship?
when people talk about their subjective experiences and how they see it?
Yes.
For me, that's never. It's definitely never frustrating. For me, that's interesting. It's very
Yeah.
intriguing. It can be sometimes a bit frustrating. I work sometimes with professionals who actually work with psychedelics and provide psychedelic therapy and things like that. And when someone is not able to use that experience in a way that it's conductive to their their goals, whatever they set as goals. So that can be frustrating because people can still get, we just discussed that psychedelics basically loosen control and disrupt our established sense of self and reality, image and all that. But people can still get stuck in that, actually, the psychedelic state, and unable to use it and so on. So that can be frustrating. For me, that's why I'm very interested in this. And I'm so excited to see these days all the research and, all the public interest going into it, or the therapeutic potential that everyone speaks about these days. So for me, it's not frustrating at all. It's just interesting. But I think we still need to, people can still use it recreationally and without any goal, just to have fun and, have interesting experiences. And then there is also the therapy when someone sets a goal and wants to understand something. So even if someone doesn't want to do anything with the experience, for me, that's fine. That's fine. It's just more that not to overdo it, not to do it at the expense of other important elements of life and so on. So everything, just like we spoke about addiction, if it's excessive, then it's not good.
Yeah. It's such an interesting time, especially here in the States, where we're beginning to see like the decriminalization versus the legalization. And there's all this talk about people, especially veterans, going out and getting help with like PTSD and all of these stuff. But there seems to be a really large medical container that's built up around it on some level. And sometimes that scares me, Henrietta, because I think, what about if people want to use it recreationally? Like, what if people can use this without it? I know that there's safety issues, and I realize that there's best practices, but it's a very interesting time to think about laying down the law or the foundation about how these substances are going to be used, especially since they've been in the category of category 1 for so long. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's definitely we need to, it's again, we just spoke about extremes. So now there is all this interest, and many people advocate for, legalization, that completely, just make it available for recreation, anything, just like, some other things, like, almost like, alcohol or other things. And I think we need to understand more. That's why the research is very good, that there is so much research and there is so much support now for the research on psychedelics, because we need that. And so we spoke about, there is what science can study, and there are all in psychedelic experiences, the subjective experiences is just as important. I mean, it's just basically half of the story. So that subjectivity creates basically endless individual variation, and so we obviously cannot understand the endless factor, all the different individuals, but we still need to understand more in order to regulate the use, and to basically create integrate psychedelics in society in a way that it will be positive in the long run, and also think about long-term consequences in terms of research. There is still not much research on long-term effects of psychedelics. Now it's very it's understandable, because it takes time to accumulate that. But so we definitely, in my opinion, we need to understand. And I think simply relying on the subjective experiences of individuals who use psychedelics without the scientific, more database approaches, it's not the safest. I think we need both. So I think that's why it takes time. I definitely support, not completely, I'm actually not pro legalization completely, maybe that's another topic, but I definitely think that they have a place in modern society and modern life, and it should be more accessible. And but we need to understand more.
Yeah, it's a brilliant part. Aura says, "Hi, what's up, Aura? Thank you for being here today. Super stoked you're chiming in. Put some questions in the chat. We can answer them for you." Which brings up another question I got coming in. This one's coming from my friend Betsy, and she says, "As someone who studies the brain, How do you reconcile the ineffable mystical experience with hard neuroscience?
Yeah, so it's actually so interesting because people ask me this question all the time, and my answer is always, even I think about this a lot because people ask this question so often. So I never feel that I need to reconcile actually, because I never in the first place, but maybe this is me, you can tell me, because I love to get feedback. So for me, it's not, there is no, I don't see any conflict, or I don't even feel like, emotionally any conflict between the subjective experiences and, everything else that is, database, and, it is therapies, and even the regulations and all that. I think even, when we talk about science versus, very often as people associate psychedelics with spirituality. That's one aspect, and many people say that science and spirituality are, in conflict. For me, it's absolutely not. It's I don't even understand. Maybe because just how I have this brain. I mean, I understand because I understand how others think about this intellectually. But for me, that's not a problem. It can completely coexist. Science is all
Yeah.
about the unknown, right? And then, in many ways, so I don't think that any current state of science needs to be able to explain everything. And if there are holes in our understanding, it's a problem. I don't think it's a problem. I think what we describe as spirituality, there are many different subjective definitions. That's also that to me that fits in the context of even I can explain it to myself very rationally. Even it's not even I don't even feel it's irrational. I think it's probably what we need to do is to look below the surface a bit, and to accept that it's almost encoded in human nature that we are usually uncomfortable, or very often we are uncomfortable with the unknown and with uncertainty. And that's one thing that psychedelics can actually help. That if someone has that too much, to be more comfortable with even a completely unpredictable chaos. Even that's one of the things that what is not known now about psychedelics that they do to the brain is that probably you have heard that they increase entropy, which is basically they increase disorder, or they decrease the order, the certain controls in the brain. So we just need to become more comfortable with that. But at the same time, still keep in mind not to get to the other pole of the extreme, that now if we are more comfortable with disorder and the unknown and uncertainty, then we don't care about anything else. We just let life go as it wants. Just go with the flow without wanting to have goals and interfere and have other values and so on. So I think it's this whole concept of balance. I think that if we have that, for me, that's the way I think about balance, and the way I deal with it internally. I think that's part of what creates this. Basically, there is no conflict for me internally between
I
this
love that.
at all.
It's such a beautiful answer. And I think it speaks to the heart of so many problems we have in society, is this idea that we should be in control, that things should go a certain way. And psychedelics do that. They allow you to sit with uncomfortableness, whether it's a thought or whether it's a feeling or whether it's an emotion. Like, you have to just sit with this thing. And if you're on a high enough dose of psychedelics, there's no escape. Like, there's nowhere to run. Like, you're going to have to sit with that thought. And it simulates uncertainty at a cognitive level, where you can begin to find that balance. And like, I think that's what we're talking about, spirituality versus science. It's sort of like this dance between two beautiful entities that are, I'm in control. No, I'm in control. I'm leading. No, you're leading. And it's so interesting to be the human in the middle of that dance right there. But I love the way you described it. And it brings up this next question that we have coming in. It says, you've seen both sides of the clipboard as a researcher and as a subject. How did being studied change your understanding of autonomy or objectivity?
Yeah, so I think this refers to when I was, so I had once I was subject in a scientific study on psychedelics. So I went there. I was in a lab and I received the psychedelics. That was a DMT study. So that was the specific substance. And so, yes, I think that refers to that. To me, actually, I thought about this, that I first asked myself, did it actually change my stance of what was it, subjectivity and say it again, what was the other one? Objectivity and
Autonomy.
autonomy. Yeah. So definitely, so it was a scientific study. So they have a specific set goals what they wanted to achieve, and so a psychedelic experience can be very hard to fit into that framework. And so I very hardly struggled with. I knew this already going into it because I experimented with psychedelics before that, and I knew that it would be very challenging to basically to stick to those the study questions. And but so I find it definitely limiting. So I felt that I didn't feel that it limited my autonomy, or it doesn't limit the autonomy of anyone who goes there to be a subject in an experience. Um, it also, I don't think that the experience itself changed my how I see my autonomy and subjectivity, objectivity, and all that. It's basically it was I just realized even more that from the experience, it's so rich, it's so complex, and when we want to squeeze it into this small framework of an experiment, it's very, very limited. And so it's challenging in many ways. Have to design that the best. And so that was the challenge of the researchers, and also mine, because I had to share all what I experienced, and there were also objective measurements and so on. But coming out of it, I don't feel that in general my psychedelic experiences, I don't think that they changed very much my view of autonomy, or subjective, objective, and so. And I think I always thought that both the subjective experience and using more database approaches and reality checks with others and feedback, external feedback. So all of this, I always thought that all of this is very important. So I don't think that psychedelics changed that for me, but it's very challenging to design the experiment and then to interpret it, the data, and to get what we get out of it. So and that's very subjective.
I love it. It's such a rich topic for me, because just the observer effect alone, just someone watching you, fundamentally changes how you act, whether you really know it or not. Like if you have someone standing next to you, especially if you're coming in with the title of a subject in an experiment, like just that framework alone is going to change the thought that you have on your psychedelic journey. Like if you're in a room by yourself and you know what, I should work on my relationship, or your mind floats freely. But I think, and I think that this sometimes is where science and spirituality can mix, and they're dancing a little bit, is just the framework of language. The language in science sometimes to me is it's very caging. Like here's an example I would love to get your opinion on. Like right now it seems to me like there's a lot of talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. But what do we get out of studying a disorder? Like what if we change the name to like post-traumatic growth opportunity? Then you're building up something around something that's like a rite of passage versus a disorder, because it's very hard to get out of a disorder. And if you're coming in with a label like you're broken, like it's really, you might not ever get unbroken, because the science right now says you have this disorder. But what if you had an opportunity? What if it's a rite of passage? Do you ever think that the limiting language of science stops us from achieving that which we're trying to achieve?
There's definitely the language also. Language, first of all, language, human language is already limited. That's why, whoever
Totally.
you
Totally.
felt it yourself, that's why we struggle to share the psychedelic experience with others. So language itself, even just without science. And then the science, it reaches another level because science is kind of rigid, there are frameworks, there are models, and there is the data, we work with data, there are rules and so on.
Yes.
So that it makes everything more and more and more, structured and more kind of limited. And so it's definitely. And then if we approach the psychedelic experiences just simply with the traditional scientific method, in a very rigid manner, that basically excludes a lot of things. So I think your question referred to, it's when we speak about diseases or
Yeah.
disorders. So I work in mental health, and especially in mental health these days, there is already a big shift towards seeing these mental health conditions as spectra. So I imagine some kind of condition that is a spectrum. It's not just one state. So it's more, flexible. It's broader, and also many people don't like labels, and I think it's
Yeah.
especially the diagnosis, especially in mental health. Many people really, really dislike. Actually, people often reject treatment, even the possibility of the treatment, because they know that they will go there and receive a diagnosis, and they don't want. It's not even just because of the consequences that
Yep.
gets on their medical record, but just because they will be called this or that, or placed
Yep.
in boxes. So there is already now a shift, like a paradigm shift in the mental health field, regardless of psychedelics, to move away from the labels and to see this, the human nature and human experience as a continuum. It's actually even in medicine, some areas of medicine even follow that trend. Disciplines such as lifestyle medicine or functional medicine. So there, the question is, the goal is not to identify, is this, the diagnosis and the disease. That's the traditional medicine uh, uh, idea, and the differential diagnosis process that it's problem solving. So we have to identify the problem. So there is a problem. So what you suggest is to remove the idea that there is a problem, just see it as a state, right? And
Yeah.
then in that state, if someone is bothered by the idea that they have a problem, they are disordered, or they have a disease, then I think it doesn't really matter what we call it. It's even if we call it, even if we keep it the diagnosis, if we call it, let's say, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, even that, I think these days we need to see as a developmental process and focus on the process and how we can get better and how we can learn from even the causes, how we can identify it from many different sources, instead of just focusing on that very current state, that snapshot that we can share when we get the diagnosis. So I think it's the whole of the mental health field. Even medicine is moving slowly in that direction, and psychedelics definitely can help. Even just we spoke about removing someone's rigidly set notion of reality. I think if someone has very difficult problems with that, maybe they can utilize psychedelics to develop a more flexible view.
I think this is a great window into why so many people want to work with you and why you're so successful at helping people, is the way in which you explain that with language, with the spirituality notion of it, and how psychedelics can be a component of it. It's a beautiful answer. I appreciate it. Do you believe that being inside, let me switch over here to this one. If the current mental health system is built on treating symptoms, how can psychedelic therapies shift the focus back to root causes or even something deeper?
Yeah, I think that's usually the psychedelic therapy. If it's therapy these days, usually they start with setting a goal, and that there is, again, there is still, whatever we call it, usually there is still something that people want to change. If someone
Yeah.
goes to therapy, either they want to change, not only that, either they want to change something that is not working optimally, or they just want to they don't even know anything wrong. They don't know. They just want to grow. And so they go into the therapy with those goals. And so usually the process of psychedelic therapy it's very process oriented. It's not oriented to that state when we, on the day when we receive the substance and we have the experience and we have the trip. That's just the beginning. And usually the most important part is the understanding, or as maybe we call it these days, integration. So that's always the process. The other side of it is the psychedelics. So you were asking about root causes.
Yeah.
So that's why the research is so interesting, because the research is also identifying. Basically, we are looking at how the psychedelic substance, the chemical, affects the brain, on the many different levels. And there is a lot known about it these days. And we know that some of those are actually those mechanistic steps that are affected by the psychedelic substance, biochemically, are part of the root cause. So it's not only that the process of integration and growth can solve that problem or allow us to grow from it, but also they can directly interfere with those mechanisms, those functions that are not working optimally. It's just in this sense, I would say it's very much like almost like any other medicine, but the psychedelics also have these huge, vast opportunities of the subjective experience and the integration of that. We definitely don't have that with a painkiller.
Yeah. Yeah, like the whole subjective aspect of it. Like I do see it sort of making its way back into some of the clinical trials, or maybe not clinical trials, but I do see it working its way back into therapy on a lot of levels. It seems to me that the tears of a loved one who sees their significant other out of the house or doing things or talking good about themselves, like those are real quantifiable things that we could incorporate into these different kind of studies. It's difficult to measure, but again, like the tears of someone who loves you seeing you do better is definitely something that's worth noting down and understanding. Do you think it's possible that there could be a therapeutic model entirely around subjective experiences?
That's a very interesting question. In my opinion, that honestly, I think that would be a terrible idea, because to be very upfront with you, because just imagine if we completely just went with the subjective experience, what would that cause? What would be the consequences? So we spoke about these different versions of reality and what psychedelics can achieve.
Right.
So they loosen up our, rigid control of, perception of reality and so on. So if we only relied on what went on inside our minds without any interaction with the external world, I think that, where does it lead to? I mean, if we already learn to function with that, just simply, we already have such a good amount of data and knowledge and experience accumulated, that we can function without interactions, without feedback, without reality checks and so on. I think it can go on for a while, but I think very soon it would get derailed. And I think that's why it's probably, and especially if we speak about therapeutic implications, if someone who already has a mental health problem and it's maybe it's just a sense of self issue, or anything, functioning issue, and very often those people already have problems, let's put it that way, problems with seeing themselves correctly. And then, let's remove all the rest of, external feedback and data and everything. Where would that lead to? I think we would go back to the old age. We could open up the insane asylums and, put their people without any interference. I think that's how I see it. But of course, I think it's again, I think we need to do this in a balanced way. Only subjective experience, I don't think that's good. It's simply because we don't, at least again, this is my view, because I don't think that any science, any discipline has ever shown very clearly what is the ultimate truth and reality, what that is. So we can only access it through our subjective lens.
Right.
So basically, I think in a way, everything that we do is subjective experience. But we still have these interactions. We speak with each other. We interact with the environment through our senses and all that. So I think that we still receive a lot of external input. So, but it always goes through everything. Goes through perception. I don't think that we can interact with the external world in any other way than through, even if it's mental, just through intuition and mental perceptions, thoughts and feelings. Those are also there is always a subjective filter.
It's well said. It's well said. There's like, it's so hard to delineate between someone who has real problems versus someone who may not, and that's not the right terminology. But how, to everyone, I think it was Bob Marley who said, every man thinks that his own problem is the heaviest. So like, we all think we have these problems, but obviously there's people that need to see someone if they're contemplating suicide on a real level, or if they have these real problems out there. But it seems there's like this giant gray area where people, maybe they need like a really close friend. Maybe they're super lonely and they haven't talked to somebody for a long time, and they just need someone to listen to them on some level. I think we get into real trouble when we are, again, giving diagnoses or allowing people to see themselves as a victim in so many ways. Yeah. Is that too much, or what do you think?
I think the victim, that's another very, these days I find it being a very trendy movement to kind of try to disrupt this victim mentality, and to make people raise awareness for that and not to basically encourage people not to see themselves, and even populations or segments of problems let's not see those problems as victim that just happens almost in a passive way. I think that's definitely a very, very beneficial, and I think psychedelics actually can help with it. I've heard from many people. I did not have that experience personally, maybe because I really never really had that kind of issues with that victim mentality very much, but I heard it from many people. That's actually one of the main primary very common issues also with addiction, as what goes on in the background, that people develop this we call one word for it, or one term for it is learned helplessness. So it's just a synonym to that victim mentality, and very often it's related to early life experiences when people did not have support, and they were not, as validated and so on. So they just lost that sense of power and influence and control, and then they turn to these other behaviors, substances, and everything else. So I think disrupting that and teaching people not to think about ourselves in that way. I think it's. I don't see any negatives in that. Some people actually, maybe not true, because I'm questioning myself as well, because some people, I heard people that people can also benefit from seeing problems that they have as not their fault. And to me, that almost equals to, being a victim. What's the difference, right? So maybe it has some, in some context, it can have some benefits. It depends on the context, but too much passivity and victimhood is never very conductive of healing and growth.
Yeah, there's a great quote that says growth and comfort can't coexist. And so that can be very helpful for people. For me too, when I find myself in some challenging times, okay, what can I learn right here? What is the message that I should be doing? What can I learn about myself to make sure this doesn't happen anymore? I got
That's actually the comfort or discomfort. That's even if we speak about psychedelics, that's one of the things that people must be. I think whoever is wants to use, psychedelics beyond just recreation, even
yeah,
recreation. I think it's good to go into that experience with prepared to be uncomfortable, because we
yeah,
don't know, what might happen. And I think that's always, we can't go wrong with that if we prepare ourselves, feeling uncomfortable. It's also a big part of, we spoke about addiction
yeah.
recovery. Many people, including myself, early in my recovery, just almost every day there was something that I realized that how much I use those behaviors to escape actually from those discomforts. So.
The word recovery is interesting to me. Is someone always in recovery, or do they ever become recovered?
That's that's almost it's a great question. It's almost like it's one of those things that do we need to see it in that way in the first place? So that's for me. That's why I actually like to discuss this, because in my opinion we don't even necessarily need to see it, to identify either with recovered or in recovery. I can tell you, what how these different models can help. Many people like the idea of always being in recovery. It's lifelong,
Yeah,
because they equate it with a self-improvement. For me,
that's a good point.
for me, I usually I don't usually, when even in my thoughts, I don't usually think about myself at this point that I'm still recovering. I'm still trying to resolve my substance use, because I don't have that problem anymore. I have problems that were still a consequence, that are the consequences of those behaviors in the past, long term, that I'm still working on. So in that sense, I can say that I'm still in recovery, yes. But in other ways, I would always, we will always have problems. We will always have challenges in life. So we can also look at those as just life. It's not recovery forever, but definitely many people. I think it's the key part is to think about what helps you the most. If it helps you to feel that you are forever in recovery, just think about it in that way. If it helps you that it's there is an end point to it and move on, let's think about it in that way. I think it's the important part is that if someone works with a helper, external helper, like a treatment provider, they have to reconcile this. If they are in conflict in how they see this, they have to at least find a compromise, because I think this can cause problems, even how they communicate in language and so on. So.
It's fascinating to me just to hear again. We always come back to language on some level, and I can't help but think the psychedelics help you change the language through which you see the world. Like they help you internally to understand, big ideas like shame and guilt or whatever. But it's that internal dialogue. What is internal dialogue a form of mechanism of action? It seems like that is something that sets off the different neurotransmitters. Are those two related?
Yeah, so it's definitely always related. So that's a big part of why I love neuroscience and behavioral science, because basically what we try to is the questions these are the questions that we are asking every day. What's behind behavior? What's
Yeah.
behind the thought? Where do those things come from? And the way we study it usually is that the mechanisms. And there is usually there's what we call behavior, or when we do an action, behavior is an
Mm-hmm.
action usually. But even if we don't consider action, simply just a precursor of a behavior, which is very often a thought or a feeling.
Yeah.
Uh, those are also, they don't come just from the nowhere. That's why these are exactly some of the things, some of the reasons why people cannot reconcile science and experience and behavior and mental health and emotions. Even emotions, many people feel that emotions and this rational understanding and the mechanisms and everything, is there is some kind of conflict. Basically, what we do in neuroscience is we study, and we have understood a lot about what generates those emotions, what's behind that on a mechanistic level, what happens, in the brain, in the whole body. These days, I think most scientists, even in medical professionals, try to look at it as a more like complex system, like holistically, not just the brain but the whole body, and not only that, but the life experience as well. And there is always some mechanism behind it. So, for example, those when we talk about what causes some type of mental health issue, and people are very often these days to speak about trauma. And trauma seems like, it's an experience. But so that's one of the areas that I studied quite deeply for many years. And so how that works, and why we carry the trauma, the memories, and the effects of that trauma for so long. And we do because they change development, different actually mechanisms, things work, physiology, and on the molecular level, they change even how genes function. I study epigenetics a lot, so those are just mechanisms how genes function, and they're expressed or silenced and so on. And so basically, all of this can be affected by if you take a chemical like a psychedelic or any other drug, it's interactions. And so usually there is always a mechanism like that behind behavior or a decision or a feeling. So they are always linked. So behavior and emotions and thoughts are not mysterious these days. I think that's also one thing that's one of the realizing this, accepting this. I think that's basically the way to reconcile that there is no conflict between these things. So
I love that. It's such a fun conversation. Do you know of, like, it makes me think about like the language of trauma. Like, is there any correlation between a person's vocabulary and their relationship with poetry and trauma? You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me on some level, like maybe even Broca's area may be the place where we find like where the trauma is held. Like the speech centers of the brain may hold the key to solving trauma on some level. Are you aware of any experiments, or have you read a bit about the language centers in the brain and why, and if that's relationship to trauma?
That's actually a good question. Language, that's not really an area that I'm very familiar with. I think language definitely, the way we construct and learn language, that's, we learn language very early in life. And, this experience, I think they get ingrained with, simultaneously with the way, together with how we, form, basically, we learn language and then we practice language. I'm not too familiar with that area. Another one that I'm very familiar with, though, is what I mentioned before, is that, what's behind trauma, and why this question, why trauma is so persistent, the effects of trauma. And that's, in one way, it's not really related to, this or that brain area, but more like the functioning of on a molecular level, like gene regulation. That's one thing that I studied, that how experience and environment can impact gene regulation, gene expression. And so that's what the discipline is these days called epigenetics, so above the genome, regulatory mechanisms. And so it's very well known that that's the main mechanism of action behind trauma. And not just trauma, because trauma is negative, any positive life experiences as well. Basically how the environment and experience can impact development and behavior and emotions and so on. So that's one level. And that's definitely, there is all this complexity in the brain that the different, when we study this, we look in different brain areas, and we look at the, more like kind of systems, and try to identify where the changes are. And so
it's so huge, Henrietta. Like sometimes I wonder, like sometimes, and again, I'm just a layman, but I wonder, like, what are we doing with mechanism of action? Like, there's so many undefined variables. Like, will we ever be able to thoroughly understand mechanism of action? I think maybe on some parts we will, but when you start putting in epigenetics and you start factoring in all these different receptors and how much we really don't know. Like, I spoke with Brian Roth about his lab, about mechanism of action in LSD. And like, the guy's a genius, but they've been studying it for like 30 plus years with hundreds of millions of dollars. And we got a safety protocol. Like, what are we doing? Like, why is mechanism of action, like, is it worth studying on some level? Because it's so broad.
Yeah, it's. I think it's. I definitely, if you are asking a neuroscientist, I think they will tell you that it's worth, because that's why we are interested in this. So I think that's part of that question that when you asked before, if we disregard objective measures, objective, quote unquote, like at least based on what we can measure with different more like what we call scientific methods, and analyze and get feedback and reproduce and so on. Without that, I think we would go back to what we discussed before, to your question. Would it be a good idea just simply leave it to subjective experience and not to care? I think it's pretty much the same question. Imagine something much more down to earth, that is medicine. Yeah. Do we want to completely abandon modern medicine? Some people do. I know that they some people. It's for me that's hard to understand. But I spoke with people like that, and they really try to live in that way. They never see a doctor. They never they never get those health checks. Usually they do when they end up in the hospital. So I think in mental health, it's very much the same. And I think just like in medicine, if we don't, we can't prescribe a medication if we don't know how, at least on some level, how it works. It's very much the same in mental health and even personal growth. And being familiar and knowing how these things work can open up infinite, just avenues to basically solutions and that are otherwise not available. And especially if someone is a professional and trying to help others with their mental health, and without that knowledge, it's very limited. That's why, for example, I do consulting. I work with many, for example, psychotherapists who don't usually have a very deep neuroscience training. And, we speak about cases, and basically they get some level of education that they never got in school, at least in that, depth. And it really helps. And they always say it helps. So I think I've never heard from anyone that it would be a good idea to remove this knowledge and this type of modern scientific understanding. Some people do, but those are usually those are the people more like unique cases, people who just decided they don't want to be part of society and they don't want to use the resources of modern society. And I think that life it can work to a certain point, but once they start having problems and they cannot resolve their problems with just themselves, they're relying on their own subjective ideas or whatever is around them. If they don't utilize all these other tools, they will be very limited, and maybe they will eventually be even won't survive, because there are some problems cannot be solved without this. That's why we live longer, humans live longer these days. It's all due to the understanding of the scientific understanding of how all this works.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer. It's so amazing to me, and I love modern medicine in a lot of ways. Like, I know people, if you need surgery, you better be thankful to have a doctor, or I know people that have tried to commit suicide, and like, you need someone to help you through some of the darkest nights. And like, we need all of it. It's such an awesome conversation to have. Do you believe psychedelics unlock neuroplastic potential that traditional treatments can't touch, or is that just good marketing?
Yeah, that's a really great. It's a very provocative question. I love this question, but I definitely for this. I definitely have a very focused and simple answer. Definitely yes. And this is one of the main, if you look at the research that has been done, it's ongoing research in psychedelics. This is actually, I'm sure you are asking this question because you already know the answer from the literature, what has been uncovered. So that's one of the main things that, in different ways, when they look at connectivity, how psychedelics change the connectivity and the interaction between different brain areas. Those are part of neuroplasticity. So the plasticity is basically the ability of the brain to change function, structure, and connections. And so we study this in different levels. So connections change. There is also the evidence that psychedelics can increase neurogenesis, which means that, in the old times, even like 20, 30 years ago, people thought that once we just lose brain cells during our lifetime, we don't produce new ones, and we don't, it's just that's why we need to make the efforts to conserve them. So it's actually not true. And even naturally, there is new growth, but psychedelics can actually influence that. So that's what we call neurogenesis, the formation of new connections, synapses, and structures in the brain. And there is also this what we discussed, disrupted control. That's a form of neuroplasticity. But actually directly there are others. I mentioned the epigenetics, that I did a lot of research on that. There is not too much evidence yet on how psychedelics change the epigenetic states, but there are definitely publication studies. Actually, I was involved in one of those that we are just putting the data together for a publication that's showing that psychedelics affect gene regulation on that level. So that's very much like how we spoke about the effect of the environment, and then psychedelics can kind of not mimic, but it basically interfere with the same mechanisms on the same level. So there is a lot of this. So it's definitely we cannot disregard this. We cannot just say that it's marketing. It's not marketing. That's why we have the data. If we only rely on the subjective experience and what we think, one could say that that's not true, but it's true. It's out there. So.
I love the question. I'm grateful for the answer. Can you see a future where gene expression is not only modified by medicine, but by meaning?
That's actually something that, in my opinion, we do that all the time, every day. We are just not aware of it. And I explain what I mean by this.
Yeah.
So what I mean by this is, we spoke about how experience affects gene expression, right? So I mentioned epigenetics. So that's how environment, experience, whatever happens to us can impact the genes, how those are regulated. And very often we construct basically life experiences based on values, based on meanings, based on goals. So we construct already every day life experiences based on meaning, what is most meaningful for us in that moment. And then we go through those experiences, and those then, that's just that's in that phase, at that stage, when the experience happens, then, those feedback is already ongoing, that they impact gene expression. So it just happens all the time. Another one very common and very well known is the effects of beliefs, meaning placebo effects. So placebo effect is also not completely mysterious these days. So it's just a form of belief, that if we believe that someone will help, we usually we can experience positive improvements. It's just a form of it. And that's also all these, it's again the way these things work, beliefs and experiences and environment, they constantly interact with our physiology, with our, our not only in the brain, the whole body, the system. And then one of the levels of this is the gene expression. So it happens every day. I'm pretty sure that something is changing based on what we are this conversation that we are having just right now. Maybe it's not long term, but it just happens all the time. It's just a bit challenging to use this constructively. Let's say, meaning if your goal is to modify gene expression, to be specific with that, because have to target. Let's say you want to change an expression you identified from some measurements, some medical test. Let's say that some gene is not functioning optimally. You want to impact that, and your idea is that I can cure that with changing my beliefs. That's hard because there are a lot of steps in between, and we don't usually know how to get there. So medicine, what medications can achieve, usually it's more like a shortcut. That many of them, if we uncover how they work, we know what they target, and with beliefs and meanings, meaning is not that straightforward.
Yeah. Here we go. We got the one and only Robert Sean Davis. And for all my listening audience out there, if you don't know Robert Sean Davis, you should look him up. The guy's a genius, got so much energy, and has all these incredible thoughts. And here's one of them right here. He says, I love epigenetics for exploring how DNA may hold ancestral impressions. I've seen many cases where trauma and addiction, although sometimes brutal in form, often serve as almost sacred disruptions, forcing refinement and growth not possible without adversity. Mm-hmm. Psychedelics can facilitate incredible perspectives for addiction treatment by framing it on a multi-generational basis, or as a tool for eternal character creation, or even viewing impossible timing on a spiritual basis.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's beautiful. Thank you, Robert, for this. I completely agree with this. So I can reflect on. Do you want me to reflect on this?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So first of all, it's definitely true that we just spoke about the the early life, and that's the intergenerational effects. That's another area that was one of my main areas of research interest. That I did research on those intergenerational effects for many years. And how, so we were asking exactly these types of questions, that how the effects of trauma, or if it's not trauma, just experience can be passed down through generations. And so we were looking at these epigenetic mechanisms, and then also the behavioral consequences, and definitely psychedelics. And also to that point that it's not all wrong, it's not all bad, that the negative life experiences that we call trauma is just one word for it. It's not all bad. Stress is not all bad. It's there is also we are actually evolution conditioned us for stress. We are designed to deal with stress. We are designed to deal with trauma, and we can definitely, like he said, Robert, definitely we can not only learn from it, but actually those even on the organic level, the biochemical level, the changes that they generate. It's not all of that is negative, even if we experience trauma. We just don't understand at the moment, all the details that, how we can, let's say, utilize a trauma experience and its physiological, biochemical consequences in a positive, constructive way. But we know it every day from life experience. That's how we learn. We learn much more from negative experiences than from positives. That's why there is also this bias, and there is also many people, in evolutionary biology think, and has been shown that that we have a bias toward focusing on negative and stresses, and so avoiding stresses and solving problems. That's also because we are set up for all this, so we don't need to think about those things as bad, even trauma. It's just more like what we do with those experiences.
Yeah, it's. I love the way that he framed it too. By he said that sacred disruptions. Like we bring into this idea that these tragedies, like maybe they are sacred. And I know that that's not scientific talk, but on some level, it is these tragedies. When we talk about people that come through addiction, often it gives them the catalyst to become the very best versions of themselves, whether they had to confront something or whether now they can help other people. But it's sort of refreshing to me to get to hear the word sacred disruptions, or even the word sacred in science on some level. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely that's it's just one way to put a
Yeah.
positive twist on it.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I can share from my own life, because
Yeah.
I'm a very good example for this. For example, I experienced addiction, a very serious one, actually, not only one. and and we could look at this, that definitely there were many negative consequences in my life during that time, and I mentioned earlier that I'm still dealing with some of the long-term negative consequences, so that's a given. But at the same time, what am I doing now? So I got into neuroscience in part due to that. I got into this whole field first just curiosity, wanting to understand how all this works, and then the next phase, once my problem was resolved, and I got into this field of recovery and helping others achieve the same. And many people, even without me saying it, when I share this with my life experience with them, they see it's almost like it's so that it's just the fact that I had this experience, and who I became from it, and I'm doing what I'm doing in my professional life, and why we are doing this conversation today. Without that experience, it would not have happened. And we can see this for those people who like spirituality, and things that there is some kind of higher meaning
Yeah.
behind all this. My life is a good example, I think. I'm not a super spiritual person, but I am very open to this, and I don't definitely don't deny it. It's like it's so. I wouldn't say perfect, but these things, how these things can come together, and what
Yeah.
we can do once we resolve to certain extent the problem, and what we can do with that, and what we can do beyond ourselves, beyond the self.
To me, that's one of the most, first off, thanks for sharing that story. To me, it's one of the most beautiful aspects of the relationship between spirituality and science, is that maybe what people are going through when they find trauma is a rite of passage. Like maybe your brain has to link up differently in order for you to navigate the new world that's emerging. Like you're emerging as something new. So why would it be easy? Like it should be hard. Like you should bump up against things that like you need help with. Like otherwise, like there's no way to really become the very best version of you if you're not tackling the biggest things out there that you need help with. And sometimes that results in a substance abuse problem or negative behavior or consequences. But I'm hopeful, and I know that you're doing this with your work, but it's taking that stigma away from someone being broken and wrecked. Like, no, this is a rite of passage. Congratulations. I know it's hard, but you made it. Maybe you crawled up here bleeding and your shirt torn, but you're here now. Congratulations. Like, you got it. Like, that to me is a big problem with the modern medicine idea of these labels that we talked about being broken or wrecked. Like, no, you're not. You made it. Like you made it here. This is congratulations. Like that's the rite of passage that people are starving for, I think, on so many levels. And I know what you're doing. Like that's a big part of recovery, right? Is understanding you're becoming this thing. You're not dying, you're becoming.
Yeah, definitely. It's just goes back to that, the victim mentality that we discussed before, and
Yeah.
that removes and then it's all this, even addiction, or any kind of really
Right.
difficult experience. It's not just it's not go it doesn't go to waste. It doesn't have to go to waste, and we can grow from it. And whether or not there is some kind of spiritual higher meaning behind it, I think it's up to, in my opinion, that's up to the interpretation of the person who is going through that. Some people believe that it's more like universal. I think that's perfectly fine as well, unless they don't force it onto others too aggressively. But it's just like any stress. I think it's just again, it's there is no way in life to escape and avoid trauma and stress and negative experiences. It's not, I would probably, some people believe, even many people actually believe that everything, when they say everything happens for a reason. I don't know if that, I don't like to use this expression for it, because that kind of implies that, there is some predestined, some kind of, it was already set up before for some kind of future purpose. I don't believe in those things very much, to say that everything happens for a reason. But definitely everything happens for a reason, in a sense that the cause and effect, and this chain of that's why psychedelics can
Yeah.
help us
Yeah.
actually see the interconnectedness and to see the cause and effect. That's why people use it for healing, because they can get in touch with those suppressed and dissociated, avoided problems, or anything that caused problems in their life, traumas or whatever, and integrate that. And then during that integration, transform the problem into something that is no longer a problem, but it's a for growth, I would say. So
It sounds like alchemy on so many levels.
but to me, it's so interesting, because that's why it's, to me, it's that's why it's science and rationality and
Yeah.
all the things that we are speaking about today, spirituality. I don't see any conflict,
Me neither.
because yeah, because even addiction, many people, especially when they experience addiction firsthand, they feel that it doesn't make sense that we make these decisions. And no, it makes perfect sense if you think, if you view it in the proper context, and why addiction develops, and why you identify the root causes and all that. It also makes perfect sense when we studied scientifically the mechanisms of the brain. We mentioned that those things that get
Yes.
hijacked, they are there for a reason, because they search survival, and it's just drugs can also interfere with that. So there is no conflict in that. I think it's maybe one of the best. If someone wants to find like a reframing, like a mindset change, is to focus on this idea that we don't need to see conflicts between things all the time. I think that's actually one thing that it's good that I'm getting there, because I wanted to share this with you before, even
Yeah, please.
that this is one of the main things that I learned from studying biology. And why this? Why do we think, humans? Why do we see conflicts between, everywhere? Politics, and these topics that we are discussing today. And people cannot make up their mind, can decide, and we have to join either this camp or that camp, or with the conflicts anywhere internally, all that. And I think it's because simply because the biology is works in that way. It's very much like a computer. Very many people are familiar a bit more with the computer. Decision trees, and when we have to make decisions, we usually, it's simplified. We have to make a choice, either or. It's even if it's more options, but there are options, and we work with those options, and that's why we see those as those options become the conflicts. And I think if we look a bit more deeply, we can recognize that very often there is no conflict between these options and these different possibilities. We can integrate them even without psychedelics. For me, it's easy. I don't know why, but this is one thing that I know that psychedelics can help with, to remove those conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. Henrietta, we're coming up on, oh no, we got some. Are you okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. I just want to double check. Sometimes I was like, first off, Deanna, thank you so much for being here. It is a great conversation, and it's been more than I thought it would be. If we go back for a moment about addiction, sometimes addiction uncovers a root problem in a family or a system or an environment. Like for someone that maybe got molested, or like maybe they turned to addiction because the weight of their family putting on them not to say anything, but a lot of the times that stigma probably comes from uncovering a truth that's a much bigger truth that person's been carrying with them for like a long time. Have you noticed that in a lot of the people that in a lot of your experience?
Of course, we just talked about the trauma and all that.
Right.
So those are just examples for that. So definitely. I wouldn't say this is the part of that nature and nurture
Right.
concept, and this is the nurture part usually, but not so it's definitely part of it. It's I would say it's almost part of it, at least some part of it. And there are also the other components. That's why it's so good to study this with a scientific method, because we also know that there is, it's not only the life experience. In some cases there can be genetic predispositions. That's also, it's not addiction, mental health. Usually most mental health conditions, there is not a very clear, very strong like genetic underlying genetic predisposition. Once you have this gene, this mutation, you will develop the disorder. Usually it's a complex interaction between the the biological, what we inherited, the DNA, and then the experience, and what the experiences cause.
It's brilliant. Glenda, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for being part of the conversation. It's great discussion. Everyone should be checking out Henrietta's work outside of this podcast. She does some amazing work. And if you go and you look at her LinkedIn page, you'll see some incredible articles about a lot of the different things that she's working on right there. Yeah, Robert Sean Davis, the one and only.
I just would like to, I'm just reading the comments also, and just catching up. Thank you very much. I didn't even expect people being here and commenting. I'm very glad that you enjoyed this again. It's so if you want to hear more, I post every week, usually every week, more than once, something on LinkedIn. So usually very often about some provocative, some science, or subjective views and things like that. So thank you very much for the feedback.
Of course. Robert Sean Davis, he's back. He says, thanks again, Robert, for everything. You're an amazing human being. He says, thankful for your dedication and professionalism towards your craft, Henrietta. It is great to see how open and vibrant your mind is, and how you joyfully avoid entanglements that may reduce your observational field. Great maturity as well in reducing language conflicts by embracing the widest possible lexicon without restriction.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you think is among the most controversial subjects in psychedelics right now?
Oh, that's a bit. Is it similar to the very first question that you asked? What is the misunderstanding? Most controversial. I don't know if I think I would go back to maybe those things that I think it's a part because in the past few years there is all this interest in psychedelics, both from people who want to experiment, and from the scientific fields and studies and medicine and all the therapeutic implications. I think it's removing a lot of the controversies. There is still always this open question, potential risks and benefits. I think we still need to learn a lot about that. I think there are still many misbeliefs about that. We discussed that as well, going back to that very first question, that the misunderstanding that psychedelics definitely it's not like the solution to everything, a simple solution, fast solution to everything. Some people, it's a very extreme view. I don't know if there is any. I think also that in terms of the regulations, and we spoke very briefly about where that is going, and I think also the extreme views of that. That's another topic. Why do we have to deal with this topic in a way that we want to make the psychedelics legal or not?
Right.
Many people believe that all substances, not only psychedelics even, but drugs, even the addictive ones, should be legalized, should be decriminalized, because that would decrease, the potential for addictions and so on. I think that also so for me that's a controversial, for example, a controversial view, because that kind of disregards all the nuances. I think we always need to when before we jump to these extreme conclusions, I think it's very important to really ask the question: how much do we really know about this, and do we know enough to make that decision? For example, to change the legal status of this substance, or that substance is the good time. What else is necessary to? If it's not a good time, then what do we need for that? So, and then in terms of the the science and the research, of course, that's by definition there are always different models, different views, different interests in that. One area that I like very much is this. We touched upon this. How psychedelics works in terms of deconstructing our perception of reality, and how we see reality, how we interact with reality, and how that works on a neurobiological level. And there's what we call this predictive. Predictive error coding or processing. I think that in the context, so in some contexts there are debates over that, but we don't need to get into the details of that. That's actually, there is a relevance of that to addiction. That's part of the reason why I'm so interested in that. But so I think we can clear up many of these controversies. But I think we need to keep our minds and our how we are dealing with these things open, and question ourselves also, how we think, question ourselves, not only always just question what's going on out there, question ourselves.
Do you think it opens the door? Like when you look back at the history of psychedelics, like there were some really dark times with like MK Ultra or like Jonestown, and it's not uncommon for people to take psychedelics and then feel as if they have this sort of ability to heal people, or they have this newfound ability where like they're the medicine. And, I can see it in some ways. I see it with some of the psychedelic like gurus out there, or some of these CEOs that are pushing psychedelics. Like it seems to me they're getting really close to like the holy man syndrome. They start people talking about him like vision. This guy's a visionary. Whoa, wait a minute. I don't know if he's a visionary. And they use language like, he reminds me of a spiritual leader in a tent. I'm like, that kind of language begins to scare me a little bit, especially when someone in that authority position is starting to gain lots of money and they're doing these things and they're pumping out these people. Like, is there a danger for sort of like a replay of what happened in the 60s to sort of have like a cult-like mentality be brought up with these substances?
That's again, I would put that in the context of what you asked before about, removing the feedback and the objective, aspects of the reality.
Yeah.
I think I know what you are referring to. It's everything can be. It's not only that extremes. Everything can we can get into extremes with everything. But not only that, people can use even psychedelics, as a power tool, and position in the position of power. When people like that, and then not only it's even for when they share their personal experience and everything, and just because they are in that position of authority and power and all that, and they have a huge following and everything, it doesn't mean that what they say is true. And I think we can see examples of that. I really don't want to mention names here, but I think everyone can come up with one or two that I never know if they do this intentionally, that they do this as a manipulation, or it's just develops in that way because they get carried away, because they can do everything. They are in that position, they can say everything, they can do everything, and they will always have attention and all that. But that definitely can cause a lot of damage, because there's influences. It's just social influence, and people in those positions and if they, happen to use psychedelics, they become an advocate, and then, they develop these extreme views, and they don't see the limitations of the psychedelic drug or psychedelic experience, and especially they don't see their own limitations, their own own shortcomings. They are not able to assess that. That's not a good, that's not a good, way to progress. But it's kind of I understand it intellectually, because like human nature, just like addiction, we can see that even as a form of, almost like a form of addiction, people get carried away with power, with everything, and then psychedelics will be part of it. That's why it's politicized. It becomes, it's just a subject of whether or not we that's why we approach it in the all these debates over legalization or scheduling and all that. Always becomes a really big topic for politics, and people don't think about it in terms of risks and benefits, and look at the really what happens, but they get associated with political polls and all that, and they just look at that. It's so interesting to me, because it's sometimes these cases when people use psychedelics a lot and they don't see the limitations, and they don't do their, probably they have, they do half of the job with it, I would say. And this definitely, so those are good examples that psychedelics are not doing good to everyone, and they can do this significant damage if they become, they initiate cults, and they initiate all these movements, and people follow them blindly. They generate these blind movements. And drugs definitely will always be very powerful in that way, because that's what drugs do. They psychoactive drugs, they change how we see reality, how we see ourselves, and it's not only in the good direction. That's what we need to keep in mind. It's not only in the good direction. It so depends on many other things.
Yeah, I use the analysis sometimes, like, when you look back at Huxley's Brave New World, you can see how something can be used as a disassociative. And I think on some level, psychedelics have that ability to help you disassociate, whether it's through shame or guilt, or maybe even stop you from confronting a problem. Like if you just take like a small dose, maybe every now and then, like maybe you're okay to go back and live a life that's not really fulfilling on some level, which seems to be antithetical to what the real psychedelic experience should be. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's for example, that's why we need to investigate. That's why it's useful to actually understand how they work, even on the mechanistic level.
Yeah.
Because I can bring up examples. For example, people I know personally, I spoke with people personally who use ketamine, and ketamine has received so much attention, therapeutic potential and all that. But it's also, it has that kind of effect. Even some of these substances actually they affect the brain in a way that they can actually impact those mechanisms that can lead to addiction, and the dopamine system and all this, that the reward system. Not all of them. So and then if that develops, this preoccupation with the psychedelic substance develops, then it's just another drug addiction, right? It doesn't matter that that substance happens to be a psychedelic. I think that's why we need to understand. We know definitely already that some of the psychedelics have that potential more than others, and so that's why it's important. I think we should not definitely skip those investigations.
It's such an incredible time. Lighterhorn, the incredible Lighterhorn. Thank you so much for being here, Lighter. I always appreciate reading the thoughtful comments, and I'm really thankful that you're here with us. He says, I've pivoted to just working for understanding of psychedelics rather than forcing the political issue. I think that's a brilliant pivot. And, it's a personal journey on so many levels. And it's interesting to see it play out on a political level, on a cultural level, but also, really you can only understand your own relationship with them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's actually, I haven't experienced with this because I started out in that way when I was only a scientist and, studying, drugs in a laboratory setting. But now it's, once you become, so that's actually, it comes from, it's once, if you only do that, if we decide to, or you want to dedicate your efforts to research and understanding and don't do anything else, I think that's also, it's very good already. It's very, very helpful. Just stop there. That's good enough. The problem starts when someone becomes more like a public figure that, what we are doing now, it's just others see this and then they challenge it. And, there will be dialogues developing from this. And at that point, I'm dealing with this. I at this point, I still want to try not to get into those, areas to get involved in the political implications and all that. But I find that very often people tell me, people question me. So I have to be able to formulate a response, have to see how I see these issues about legalization and the politics and so on. So once you get in that position of just public you are out there and speaking about this, I think it's very hard not to get involved. You can still choose not to get involved. I personally don't mind to a certain extent now, but definitely definitely familiar.
I think it's important to bring up issues that are controversial and that are at the edge, because that's where the contention point is, where the conversation needs to be had. And it doesn't need to be super contentious or angry or violent or anything. But I think that this is something that's sort of showing its face in culture, and we're learning how to work with it. We're learning how to decipher it and build a relationship around it. So any questions that aren't asked, like it's the old adage of there's no such thing as a dumb question. Like, we got to ask the questions, who knows? Like, maybe I don't know, maybe this person knows, maybe they don't know, or maybe we come to an agreement on something. But yeah, it's interesting. It's cool to see this taking place.
There is even, the old is so the legalization question. If scientists never get involved in politics, then that there's level those and they don't interact with the decision makers.
Right.
Level, then if nobody takes that role, that position, then they will be even more blinded. At least that's for example, that's my motive when I get involved in acts like that, and as a consultant or in any way like advocacy or lobbying or anything. It's just to be able to, again, it's true to those comments that we discussed before, is to broaden up their perspectives and to give actually people a reality check, because I think that's, again, they get trapped in their subjective. If they are politicians or interested on that level, they will never look at the scientific literature and those studies. They don't know actually what they are dealing with on a more like mechanistic level or objective level. And I think it's useful for them to have that feedback, and someone has to take that role. But of course, nobody should be forced to take that role.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the idea of, in a lot with the pharmaceutical industry being so big and so much attention on helping people and getting better, there seems to be on some level like a shift from actual science to like company science, and it's sort of been captured in a way. Like, I see so many brilliant young students that are being pushed into writing theoretical footnotes for big pharma, because there's really no money in some of these really interesting studies that I think are interesting that would be helpful to people. Like, how do you patent it? How do we take the mystical part out and just turn it into like this other side, and then that can help people with strokes or something like that? So there is real contention there, but there's real conversation right there. Speaking of that, like, what are your thoughts on taking the sort of mystical or the trip part out of the psychedelics and just allowing for the mechanism of action? Is that something that's possible, or what are your thoughts on that? I got to plug in my computer, so excuse me while you go ahead and take that question.
Yeah, so I think that's possible because it's so we discussed, you asked about the mechanism of action. Is it just a marketing technique, and so I share that there is actually quite a significant amount of scientific evidence now that so they do affect, do have those mechanistic impacts. And so now I forgot my stay throat. Can you? But what was the question?
So the question is, there seems to be some studies going around right now where they're trying to take the sort of dimensional, spiritual, the hallucinations out of the actual.
Yeah, take the spirituality. I think that's possible. Even if they affect those, on the mechanistic level, the physiology, we can have benefits simply from that. I think even if someone, that's when people microdose psychedelics and all that. So usually that does not trigger those, mystical experiences, at least not consciously. And if they just simply impact the mechanisms on a biochemical level, it's pretty much like a medication. I think that can also have benefits. So we don't necessarily, I think it's not really a necessity to add the spiritual and mystical, part, and all this, what we don't know, the unknown. We can just simply work with them as medicines, and it's just another type of medication. And they can become part of traditional medicine even. We will see if that ever happens. I don't know. I don't even have a good prediction for that at the moment, but that could have, ketamine again. It's already being used in medicine by medical doctors. Many of them, provide it in their clinic, ketamine therapy, and so that's usually still some kind of psychedelic therapy that they discuss. There is some integration and all that, but I think that's we can still have benefits without that part. So that's actually even that's, in my opinion, the beauty of it, that we can benefit on so many different levels, and we don't need to turn someone who is like who doesn't believe, who doesn't care about any of these spiritual things, and there's a mystical things, and there's someone a really kind of hardcore atheist, and we don't need to turn them into a believer in anything in order to benefit in some ways. So many possibilities.
Yeah. I often wonder, and I'm curious to get your perspective as a neuroscientist. It seems to me like in the throes of like a really deep psychedelic trip, like someone that takes like 10 grams, or maybe they do like 5 hits or something like that. But in these big, life-changing or these big psychedelic doses, a lot of the times you're confronted with like open eye visuals, like these geometrical images, or maybe you hear a voice, like you have these audio hallucinations, or maybe you see like your grandmother, or you have a conversation with someone like in real time and it seems so real to you. Do you think that that is the manifestation of neuroplasticity happening in real time?
That's the $1 million question. I don't think that anyone knows the answer to that for sure. That's again, it's one of those things that I wouldn't dare to say, but for sure. I think, I can speculate about it. So, for example, we can even simply, again, if we just simply take what is already known by neuroscience about what we discussed before, that they kind of loosen up these control, these perception. They change perception and they allow more disorder, and that's why hallucinations, and we can just think that those are just part of that. It's like random things happening, or we can speculate that in that state we are more receptive to other, more like if someone is interested in more a spiritual reality, and there is some energies and interacting with the brain and the body, and that we can actually more consciously, maybe it's always there, that interaction, but that normally consciousness generates, and reality construction puts barriers, filters to that. We don't usually go there, and then it's disrupted, and then we are suddenly we are able to actually see more of that, perceive more, like more, or not really, with our senses, like, five senses, but more mental sensors. And so it's actually a genuine, some other, realities that we don't understand. I'm completely open to all of this. That's why I'm so interested in this topic, because it's so intriguing, all these possibilities. And I don't think that we know at the moment that there is anything out there, or even, out there definitely that says definitively that we know the answer to this question, if it's just hallucinations, or, making up random, chaos generated by the brain, or we actually interact with something else. And the subjective experience, that can be anything. That, many people, I'm sure you had experiences when those can be so intense sometimes, that when you really feel that literally we feel that, under the influence, that this is actually the reality, that what we see, those visions and all that, and we have access to it. And I don't think that it's, again, it's we can say that for sure. I think we can say that on a, again, subjective level, on an individual level, what believe about those, but there is no real evidence what is real about that.
I got some friends of mine. I got a lot of friends I want to introduce you to, but the ones I'm thinking about right now are the Fishleys, and they do a lot of work with iboga. They've gone back to Africa and worked with the Bwiti tribe, and they have noticed this pattern that's happening. And for those that don't know, iboga is it's a psychedelic, but it's not a slow acting psychedelic. It's not 5 or 7 or 10 hours. It's more like 48 or 72 hours. And what they have noticed with a lot of the people they're working with is that they have real-time hallucinations of the problems in their life, like real time, where they're talking to them. And the pattern they see is also the trauma that seems to be going on in their mind. Like if they had a problem with their mom that abused them, they will sit down and have a conversation with their mom in real time, and they'll come to the conclusion of, oh, while my mom didn't do well, she did much better than her mother did. And it seems to me my mother did the best that she could. And that will help them to alleviate the trauma right there. Is there a possible way where you could set up a study that maybe it only showed correlation, but maybe you could show more? Like, could you study the visions of people and the neuroplasticity that's happening and their trauma and come to a conclusion like these are all connected?
Yeah, these are exactly what some of the studies are doing. So it's not only that. Usually there is some kind of scientific measurement, like a brain imaging, but goes on in the brain, and then people are asked about, and they even have to interact during the experience. I did this myself, form of this myself once, and that's exactly. And I think it's also the earlier experiences, a trauma or anything. But a lot of it is, the wavy state is based on memories, and actually, so it's definitely, we already know that the psychedelics, a lot of what the psychedelics do, all this disruption of all these processes, in part they disrupt also the memories, and how we interact with memories, and let's have those things come up that previously dissociated, or not remembered, or things get processed or constructed, pieced together, from the different memory fragments in a different way, and suddenly that's the insight that we suddenly understand something in a new way. Those definitely that's basically that's definitely what happens in psychedelic therapy, exactly. So that's the beauty of it.
It's so exciting to think that it's almost like an evolution of therapy on some level. Or maybe it's the indigenous people already knew this and we're just catching up on some level, but it's fascinating to think that you can remember a situation and fundamentally change the outcome of that situation. Like it's the wrong terminology. It's kind of like time traveling, but it just seems like such a brilliant way for people to actually self-heal or find a way to move forward in life. It's so beautiful on so many levels.
Yeah, it's also, I find it so fascinating that, the whole consciousness that, when everyone is more or less familiar with the fact that that most of the mental processes and decisions that we make are unconscious, like 90% or more.
Yep.
And then, when we use these substances, then, we can remember, or, we can put piece together more of it, or we can access more of it. So in that way, that 90% unconscious, it becomes a bit more conscious, it enters consciousness, or we can reconstruct them in different ways. And yeah, so definitely that's what it's I think it's what is really fascinating is what you mentioned, that people have done this. It's not the invention of the 21st century or 20th century or anything, that the shamans and it's the people during the tribal ages discovered it very early in nature, that many of these plants grow in nature, and they ingested them and realized that so it's definitely using psychedelics is not new. I think what is new is that now we are adding this more like, modern type of understanding. So we are making it a kind of clarifications. And shamans usually we're not interested in, all the neurobiology.
Lighter Horn, thanks again for being here, my friend. He says we should have access to real healing tools. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, yeah. So it goes back, I guess, like access to accessing psychedelic therapy, psychedelics. Should they be accessible freely to everyone or not? It's a whole. I think that could be a whole different discussion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful discussion. Henrietta, we just blew through like 2 hours like it was 5 minutes. I always love talking to you. It's so much fun, and I feel like I get to walk away with different insights, and I appreciate your opinion on all of them. Where can people find you? What do you got coming up, and what are you excited about?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the conversation. I also enjoy this very much. I always feel like when we talk that usually they go all over the place. It's almost like not everyone is open to this type of discussion. It's almost like a psychedelic experience, just with normal consciousness, like, jumping all over the place with this open mind without constraints. But anyway, so in terms of contact information, professionally, so I have a website with my company. My company is called Objective Recovery. We have a website called, it can be found objectiverecovery.com. It's actually very simple at the moment. We'll update it later this year, and so you will find some information there. If you want to connect with me, I am I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn once or twice, more or less every week, something sometimes related to similar things that we are discussing today. And so via LinkedIn, and so at the website, again, there is a contact. And also we have now podcasts. So we just launched a podcast. Actually, George, you were a guest, one of the guests. We will release that episode soon, so that will also be interesting. So that's on the full-length episodes of that podcast. That's also called Objective Recovery. Can be found the full-length episodes on YouTube, Objective Recovery account. So just go there. There are already a few episodes there. We speak a lot about addiction there, but there will be other episodes. The one about with George will be something else. I won't spoil it. So you'll see in a couple of weeks. And then we also have a short versions we post of those podcast episodes. I post them on LinkedIn, also TikTok, and basically that's it. So on social media, it's like just anyone Googles my name. I don't think that there is anyone else. I'm not ever with this name, so it's easy to find me.
And I would encourage everybody to go down to the show notes and check out the links, and do yourself a favor. You post so much incredible things on LinkedIn on a wide variety of topics. And I just want everyone to go over there and look for themselves to see the things you're writing about and to inquire about objective recovery and the things you're doing. I really appreciate the way in which you approach the recovery and your style of communication and your openness. And I'm really thankful that you're here today. So hang on briefly afterwards, but to everybody within the sound of my voice, thank you so much for being here. Lighter, Sean, Deanna, Glenda, Robert, Aura, thank you everybody for chiming in. Betsy, everybody in the comments on the monitor over here, thank you so much for being here. And that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.
Yeah, thank you very much for the audience, for the comments. So, George, for having me today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too. Okay.